Thursday, June 7th, 1962. A half-day of school for 10-year-old Mary Ann Verdecchia of Bloomfield, Pennsylvania. At around 2 p.m. that day, Mary Ann left the home of her aunt as she had done countless times before. When she had not returned home by 10 p.m., her aunt called the police. Over the next few days, police, firemen, local residents, friends, and even the Boy Scouts scoured the neighborhood with a fine-tooth comb, looking for some sign of Mary Ann. No trace of the young girl was ever found, and to this day, her sudden disappearance remains frustratingly lacking in answers.
Mary Ann's disappearance was one of the strangest that law enforcement had ever seen. From the outset, they had virtually nothing to go on, save for some vague accounts of those who had seen Mary Ann out and about on June 7th, and nothing about her known activities that day seemed out of the ordinary. Faced with an almost complete lack of any physical evidence, such as shoe prints or discarded clothing, authorities were left with little choice but to fan out and search. A search which has now entered its 6th decade.
In June of 1962, 10-year-old Mary Ann Verdecchia lived with her aunt, Miss Ruth Riley, in Bloomfield, a small community just outside of Pittsburgh. Her father, Joseph, lived in nearby Lawrenceville, but was unemployed and struggled with alcoholism. Contact between Joseph and Mary Ann consisted almost entirely of telephone calls. Mary Ann's mother, Marilyn, was even further afield, living in Chicago at the time. Mary Ann was Joseph and Marilyn's only child. To those who knew her, Mary Ann was a quiet, friendly young girl, but one who often seemed lonely. She delighted in making new friends and seemed to prefer companionship as opposed to playing alone. At the time of her disappearance, she was attending the 5th grade at the nearby Immaculate Conception School. By all accounts, she enjoyed school, and a faculty member later recalled that she delighted in riding elevators and playing under the nearby bridges. Mary Ann's aunt, Ruth Riley, resided at 119 Moorewood Avenue in what can best be described as a typical slice of 1960s suburbia. Near enough to the hustle and bustle of Pittsburgh to commute, yet far enough away to be spared the honking horns and foul air. Although Mary Ann had been separated from her parents for 5 years, she seemed to be growing and thriving in her present surroundings. It is perhaps cliché, yet by all outward appearances, everything seemed normal and stable, until the day Mary Ann went missing. Despite one of the largest, most intensive missing person searches in Pittsburgh's history, no trace of Mary Ann has ever been found. Faced with an almost complete dearth of physical evidence, authorities circulated photos and a detailed description of Mary Ann. They also did their best to accurately reconstruct her known activities on June 7, 1962. The day dawned sunny and clear. Mary Ann put on her school uniform and left for what was to be only a half day of classes, as the current term was coming to an end the following week. Sometime after noon, Mary Ann returned to her aunt's home for lunch. After lunching with her aunt, Mary Ann tied her hair back into a ponytail, changed out of her school uniform and into her play clothes. After telling her aunt she was going out to play, Maryanne left the home via the front steps. The time was somewhere between 2 and 2:15 p.m. Ruth Riley's home was located here at 119 Moorewood Avenue, the point where it is today intersected by Fitzgerald Street, which did not yet exist in 1962. The immediate neighborhood is shaped somewhat like a pork chop, bound on the south by Center Avenue and to the east, north, and west by double sets of railroad tracks. The dynamics of the surrounding area alternate between residential suburban sections and small-town business districts. Whatever her route and speed of travel, Maryanne made her way 4 blocks south to what was then the Martinique apartment complex, which, contrary to many news reports, has not been demolished and is still very much in use. A former friend of Maryanne's named Jean Emery lived on the top floor in apartment 56 along with her cat. Maryanne was a not infrequent visitor to Miss Emery's apartment, dropping by to talk, play with the cat, and occasionally run errands for Emery. According to Jean Emery, she asked Maryanne to run down to a local store and purchase some cat food for her. Maryanne was delighted, and Miss Emery gave her some money for the purchase. The Martinique apartments, now the Boulevard apartments, were located here at 4740 Baum Boulevard, 4 blocks south of Maryanne's residence. Save for some modernization in business and the removal of some residential homes, the surrounding neighborhood has not changed appreciably since 1962. Maryanne left the Martinique apartments and headed for the Kroger supermarket on Center Avenue, just 2 blocks away. Maryanne purchased some cat food and left the Kroger's, stopping briefly to exchange pleasantries with an acquaintance on her way out. She returned to Jean Emery's apartment, where Miss Emery allowed Maryanne to keep the change from the cat food purchase. Maryanne wanted to play with the cat some more, but Emery asked her to leave and come back a little later. Maryanne left the Martinique apartment complex. She apparently walked north and back to Moorewood Avenue. Her next known stop was to the residence diagonally across from her aunt's home. 2 of Maryanne's friends, Sandra and Timothy Gorman, lived here, along with their mother, Shirley. Mrs. Gorman later recalled that Maryanne knocked on her door, apparently checking to see if either of her children could come out and play. Neither were home at the time, and Shirley advised Maryanne that she was nursing a headache and to come back later. Maryanne left. Shirley Gorman advised authorities that she is positive the encounter took place just before 2:30 p.m. as Art Linkletter's talk show, House Party, came on 2 or 3 minutes later. We will discuss the distances and timing related to Maryanne's known movements later in the feature. At some point over the next 30 or so minutes, Maryanne returned to the Martinique apartments, where she was greeted by building manager William Dozier. Dozier reportedly advised Maryanne that Jean Emery was no longer home. Dozier reported that Maryanne waited for a bit in the apartment's lobby, presumably expecting Jean Emery to return home. According to some accounts, she left the apartment's lobby and headed back towards Baum Boulevard. She apparently stopped briefly along her route at the Belvedere bar, where she knew one of the waitresses. The owner of the bar, Mary Adamitz, later told the Pittsburgh Press that she recalled Maryanne stopping that day and tapping on the window to get her attention. According to Adamitz, Maryanne appeared to be fine. Quote, "She was full of life as ever," end quote. Maryanne reportedly walked on by the window, and Adamitz did not see her again. The time, according to Adamitz, was just before 3 p.m. Maryanne then crossed Baum Boulevard and headed north in the direction of her home. She was observed crossing the street by both William Dozier and her waitress friend from the Belvedere, Miss Ann Lippard. Lippard advised she was standing near the intersection of Baum Boulevard and Enfield Street. The time, according to both Dozier and Lippard, was right at 3 p.m. By all accounts, this was the last time Mary Ann Verdecchia was confirmed to have been alive. Around 6 p.m., Mary Ann's Aunt Ruth began to worry. Along with her son, she made a cursory search of the neighborhood and called Mary Ann's known friends to ascertain if anyone had seen her. No one had. Just after 10 p.m., Ruth gave in to her fears and called the Pittsburgh Police Department. A description of Mary Ann and the circumstances of her disappearance was sent out via radio and teletype. One of those who received the late-night broadcast would go on to work the case in some form or another for the next 61 years. Then Captain Therese Rocco, head of the Missing Persons Bureau, received news of the disappearance by telephone. Her extensive 2017 autobiography is the basis for much of what we know about the early stages of the investigation. And what we know is that the wheels started turning almost instantly. By the next morning, dozens of officers, along with 31 trained police dogs, had joined the search. Mary Ann's photo, clothing, and physical description were distributed to local media outlets. By the evening of Friday, June 8, 1962, the young girl's image was being flashed nearly nationwide. Authorities undertook a standard two-pronged approach. While officers and dogs were beating the bushes and making inquiries of local residents, Rocco, along with other detectives, sought out Mary Ann's immediate family. Her father, Joseph, was located without much difficulty as he came to Ruth Riley's home almost immediately after learning of the situation. Joseph, however, was unable to shed any light on the case. He admitted that since he and his wife had separated in 1957, he had only communicated with Mary Ann by phone. Mary Ann's mother, Marilyn, was a different story. All anyone seemed to know was that she was somewhere in Chicago, with no known address or telephone number. Maryanne Verdecchia quickly shot to the top of the person of interest list when it was learned that she had recently shown a sudden interest in reconnecting with Mary Ann. On the ground, the search proceeded in a methodic way. Officers and volunteers started at the Verdecchia and Gorman residences and fanned out in all directions. They checked playgrounds, dumpsters, under bridges, in thickets, along railroad tracks, which Mary Ann was said to frequent. They even took to exploring the sewers. The results, however, were less than encouraging. In fact, they were nil. Given the proximity to Pittsburgh and its numerous means of transportation, authorities quickly began to fear that Mary Ann could, effectively, be anywhere in North America. Leads and tips began pouring in. Greyhound driver Ike Stinger reported having seen Mary Ann boarding a Chicago-bound bus in Pittsburgh. Another witness reported having seen her outside of a Pittsburgh department store. Yet another said she had boarded a trolley on North Braddock Avenue and was in the company of an unidentified woman. None of the alleged sightings panned out, and police repeatedly found themselves back at square one. Eventually, authorities were able to unearth a possible Chicago address for Mary Ann's mother, Marilyn. On Tuesday, June 19th, agents of the FBI called at the address where they finally located Maryanne Verdecchia. She was flown to Pittsburgh that evening. However, hopes that Marilyn would hold the answers to the mystery quickly evaporated. She advised that she did not have Mary Ann and had not seen her since their separation in 1957. Marilyn and Joseph Verdecchia cooperated with authorities and were eventually cleared by the Pittsburgh police of any involvement in Mary Ann's disappearance. On Friday, June 22nd, police were presented with what may be the only physical evidence of Mary Ann's disappearance. That day, 8-year-old Jackie Pillow told police that on Friday, June 8th, the day after Mary Ann disappeared, She had found a bracelet near the service entrance to the Highland Park Zoo. Authorities examined the bracelet and found it to be made of simulated pearls with an amber stone in the shape of a heart. According to friends and Ruth Riley, Mary Ann Verdecchia owned just such a bracelet. Moreover, the tiny trinket was now missing from the jewelry box where Mary Ann had kept it. Police showed the bracelet to Ruth, and she confirmed it was identical to the one Mary Ann was known to have owned. 3 of Mary Ann's friends also confirmed that they had seen her wearing just such a bracelet. News of the discovery was soon augmented by a young girl who claimed to have heard a child screaming near the Highland Park Zoo on the afternoon of June 7th. The young girl was attending a school picnic at the time. Another girl reported having seen a young girl in attire nearly identical to that of Mary Ann's run down a hill near the picnic area and tumble over an embankment. The latter sighting was reported to have occurred on June 7th, the very day Mary Ann went missing. While some hopes were buoyed, authorities were skeptical. The bracelet in question was not unique and was available in dime stores throughout the area. Additionally, Shirley Gorman, who advised the bracelet had been a gift from Jean Emery, did not think the bracelet found in Highland Park was the same one Mary Ann had worn. Gorman advised that when she last saw Mary Ann on the day she disappeared, she was not wearing the bracelet. However slim the chance, it was one that authorities could not ignore. On Monday, June 25th, police and other officials were joined by hundreds of local Boy Scouts to search the area in and around Highland Park. The massive search team fanned out over the wooded hillsides between Highland Park and Washington Boulevard, literally searching bush by bush. Hearts sank later that day when a pair of red shorts, a blouse, and some shoes were found. However, it was later established that none of the clothing or other items found in the area belonged to Mary Ann. The search of the Highland Park area went on for 4 days. Nothing else was ever found, and the enormous search for young Mary Ann Verdecchia was soon scaled back. Authorities continued to interview potential suspects and check leads, but all leads led to dead ends. Just what happened after Mary Ann left her aunt's home on June 7th? From the 6 confirmed witness accounts, her general movements can be traced with reasonable certainty. However, the exact time of each sighting and the order in which they occurred is softer. Given the developed nature of the surrounding area, time differentials as small as 3 to 5 minutes can mean the difference between yards and miles. Bloomfield wasn't and still isn't an isolated or rural area. Multiple means of fast ingress and egress by foot and mechanized travel are available. So, what are the points A, B, and C of Mary Ann's disappearance? As previously stated, the exact order may be open to some debate, but the locations and approximate times are still instructive. We know that Mary Ann's aunt reported that she left her home at 119 Moorewood Avenue at about 2 p.m. That places point A here. Again, timing is crucial, and we have no way of knowing if Mary Ann made any deviations or side trips before she reached her next known stop. Points B, C, and E are more difficult to pin down, with part of the difficulty being the overall veracity of 2 key witnesses. Subsequent revelations of a hooker-John relationship between Jean Emery and building manager William Dozier caused some to seriously question the reliability of their accounts. Assuming Emery and Dozier were honest and accurate, Mary Ann's next known actions unfolded this way. William Dozier advised that Mary Ann arrived at the Martinique Apartments here just after 2 p.m. She called at the apartment of Jean Emery on the building's 5th floor. Emery reported that she asked Maryanne to go to the nearby Kroger's and buy some cat food. Maryanne took some money from Emery, left the apartment, and headed 1 block south to Center Avenue. She next would have walked east along Center to the Kroger's supermarket, which in 1962 was located here. Maryanne purchased some cat food and exited the store. She exchanged general greetings with an adult acquaintance on her way out, though the acquaintance did not recall at exactly what time the interaction occurred. Maryanne presumably went straight back to the Martinique apartments. Jean Emery advised that she allowed Maryanne to keep the leftover change, but told Maryanne that she was tired and asked her to come back later in the day if she wanted to play with her cat. Maryanne left the apartment complex. Her next confirmed stop was at the home of Miss Shirley Gorman at 126 Moorewood Avenue, here. For whatever reason, Maryanne had chosen to walk the 3 or so blocks back to her home neighborhood. By all accounts, Maryanne did not remain here long, and Mrs. Gorman was able to confirm the time with relative certainty given the starting time of the Art Linkletter television show at 2:30 p.m. Mrs. Gorman said the program started within a minute or two of Maryanne's departure. According to Therese Rocco's memoirs, Maryanne next returned to the Martinique apartments, where she was met by William Dozier. Dozier advised Maryanne that Jean Emery was no longer home. According to Dozier, Maryanne waited in the apartment's lobby for some time and then left the apartment complex. Sometime during the next few minutes, Maryanne walked by the Belvedere Bar, located here. She was recognized at the window by the bar's owner and reported to have been in no distress. Authorities have placed this stop after Maryanne's return to the Martinique apartments. It is, however, not impossible for it to have occurred before Maryanne visited Emery's apartment. The Martinique apartment complex and the Belvedere Bar actually share the same address. Whatever the order of events, Maryanne was last confirmed to have been seen crossing Baum Boulevard in this general area, headed north. The time, per the accounts of William Dozier and waitress Ann Lippard, was right at 3 p.m. Dozier added that he too based this time on the conclusion of a television program he had been watching. In the span of about 1 hour, Maryanne had crisscrossed the immediate neighborhood twice and was heading back towards her place of beginning. What happened next is not known, but Maryanne never made it back to point A. If the accounts of the young children from 2 weeks later are to be believed, then there may indeed be a point G. Highland Park, where the pearl bracelet was found and screams heard, is located here, approximately 5 miles north of Maryanne's last known location. If it was Maryanne who was seen and heard in Highland Park, how had she gotten from here to here? The trek is an easy one to make by car or even by bicycle. However, by foot it would not have been an appealing or particularly safe route of travel for a 10-year-old girl, although the abilities and tenacity of children as young as Maryanne are often underestimated. It would, although, have been very out of character for Maryanne. One of her friends later advised she'd stick around the neighborhood and not go far away, referring to Maryanne's usual behavior when playing a version of hide-and-seek. Whether or not it was Maryanne who was at Highland Park on June 7th remains an open question. Most authorities, including Captain Rocco, tended to discount the notion, citing the distance involved and the complete lack of any physical evidence beyond the bracelet, which some also tend to discount. If it was Maryanne at Highland Park that day, why was she there? How had she gotten there? Where did she go afterwards? All questions which may, at the end of the day, be purely academic. Some theorize that if it was Maryanne at Highland Park, then she may have been tricked into going there by a kidnapper or predator in her neighborhood. A visit to the nearby zoo may perhaps have been the lure. It is certainly not an unheard-of scenario, although the notion of a kidnapper or predator snatching a child in broad daylight and then taking them to an even more crowded and public place does seem to stretch the limits of credulity. With no more witnesses coming forward and an almost complete lack of physical evidence, the investigation into the disappearance of Mary Ann Verdecchia ground to a halt. Most authorities eventually resigned themselves to the most likely scenario. Maryanne had been kidnapped, murdered, and her body never located. Although stalled and apparently moribund, Maryanne's case has never been out of the local headlines for long. Newspapers, radio, and television have routinely reported on Maryanne's disappearance during the early weeks of June. In 1977, on the 15th anniversary of Maryanne's disappearance, the case was recapped yet again for Pittsburgh's then CBS affiliate KDKA.
Today is the 15th anniversary of a disappearance that touched off the most intense manhunt in the city's history. On June 7, 1962, a fifth grader at the Immaculate Conception School in Bloomfield vanished, and no trace of the youngster has ever been found.
The case has never been closed. It remains a bizarre story without an ending. In the minds of most people, Mary Ann Verdecchia will always be 10 years old, but if she's still alive, she is now 25 years of age. It was 15 years ago today, on June 7th, 1962. Maryanne came home for lunch to this house at 119 Moorewood Avenue, where she lived with her aunt, Mrs. Ruth Riley. She changed into play clothes, ran across the street to run an errand for a neighbor, Mrs. Gorman. Maryanne then went to an apartment building on Baum Boulevard to run another errand. That's where she was last seen. She was in the 5th grade at the Immaculate Conception School in Bloomfield. She wasn't an A student, had no particular hobbies. Her teachers described her as a happy but a lonely child. Her parents had long been separated. Her mother, Maryanne, who worked as a waitress in Chicago, was brought back to Pittsburgh for questioning. But like hundreds of other suspects, Mrs. Verdecchia could offer no clues to her daughter's disappearance. The hunt that followed lasted weeks. It included helicopters, Boy Scouts, canine dogs, hundreds of police officers and volunteers. It still is considered the most intense in the city's history.
It was the one case that created, more interest in any case that I recall.
There's never been a clue. There has never been...
No, that's one of the reasons it has been an outstanding case. And basically because of her young age, 10 years of age, and never being able to determine whether she was murdered or whether she was kidnapped. Although I feel very, very, strongly that foul play was involved.
In 1962, school closed on June 15th. The school picnic was held the following Wednesday. There was a little boy whom Maryanne wanted to take to that picnic. He was 11 at the time. Timothy Gorman still lives on Moorewood Avenue. He's 26 now, but he has vivid memories of Mary Ann Verdecchia.
She sort of was my girlfriend, but as I was saying before, perhaps I was more interested in baseball at the time. I remember she was looking forward to going to Kennywood with me a couple days before she was missing.
Your mother was perhaps the last person to ever see her alive. Did she spend a lot of time at your house?
Yes, she lived roughly catty-corner from my house, and she got along very well with my mother. There was almost no age difference, so to speak. And she would come over just like a housewife and just talk.
Was she a happy little girl?
Definitely. I don't think she had any problems at all.
Do you have any idea what might have happened to Maryanne?
Well, I have a lot of things that I have speculated, and some things that my mother told me that I can remember. But really to find out exactly what happened at this point in time would be impossible because of the time span.
Do you think she's still alive?
No.
Officially, Mary Ann Verdecchia is still listed as a missing person. No one wants to think she met with foul play. And yet, after 15 years, that fear is the only logical conclusion one can reach. This is Eleanor Shano, Eyewitness News.
63 years have now passed since the day Mary Ann Verdecchia disappeared. Her father, Joseph, passed away in 1973. Her mother, Marilyn, in 1983. Her aunt, Ruth Riley, lived out the remainder of her life in the same residence on Moorewood Avenue. She passed away on September 16, 2005, at the age of 85. Her former home on Moorewood Avenue still stands and is once again a private residence, as is the former home of Shirley Gorman. The Martinique apartment complex has also stood the test of time and is today known as the Boulevard Apartments. Captain and later Assistant Chief of Police Therese Rocco never gave up on finding Maryanne. Even after her retirement in 1994, she continued to pursue leads and theories, taking advantage of newer and improved communications technology along the way. In 2010, DNA from two of Maryanne's surviving cousins was obtained by the police and entered into the NamUs system. To date, there have been no hits. Therese Rocco, who spent the better part of 61 years doggedly searching for Maryanne, passed away on December 11, 2023, at the age of 97.
An interesting side note, Mary Ann Verdecchia was not the first young lady to go missing after having visited the old Martinique apartments. In November of 1959, 30-year-old Marcella Croce vanished without a trace, having last been seen eating dinner in the apartment complex. No connection between Marcella's case and Maryanne's was ever established, though the proximity alone left many more than a little suspicious. We will perhaps examine Marcella's case in a future presentation. For the time being, however, please pay close attention to this summation concerning Mary Ann Verdecchia.
Mary Ann Verdecchia was last seen at approximately 3 p.m. on the afternoon of June 7, 1962. She was reportedly observed crossing Baum Boulevard from the Belvedere Bar and the Martinique Apartments. Both were located at 4740 Baum Boulevard in the community of Bloomfield, Pennsylvania. On the day of her disappearance, Maryanne was attired in red shorts, a white angel-style blouse, white socks, and white tennis shoes. Witnesses recalled that she had tied her hair back into a ponytail. She may have been wearing a simulated pearl bracelet with a heart-shaped amber stone, similar to this one. She was also known to frequently wear 2 rings, one her birthstone, and the other a plain silver band. Mary Ann Verdecchia was 10 years old the day she disappeared. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed approximately 50 pounds. She had short black hair and large brown eyes. She had a small scar in the center of her forehead. If she is still alive, Maryanne would today be 73 years old. If you have any information concerning the disappearance of Mary Ann Verdecchia, please contact the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Police Department at 412-323-7800.